Welcome to Recalculating Small Business.
Dan, in our quest for bringing you some of the most interesting people who service and participate in the small business area, we have a very unusual guest today, president of his own company. Andy, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about your company and about you and how you came to found the company.
Absolutely. So my name is Andy Fromm. I'm the CEO of a company called Service Management Group. We're in the customer experience survey business. And I started the company in 1991 with my father, Bill Fromm, and professor at Harvard Business School, Len Schlesinger. Len had started his work on the service profit chain, and that's really the idea that employee loyalty drives customer loyalty, drives sales growth and profitability. And we started this business on that concept, really demonstrating the service profit chain and helping companies to use customer and employee feedback to grow.
You have one of the most unusual companies. Small businesses have often failed to adequately take the pulse of their employees, thinking that the personal side of their business enables them to really know what's going on. In particular, last week I ran into a situation with a founder of a company had sold out his company to another larger group and was very bitter because he found that 3 of his employees had been actually negotiating with the company before they bought with the acquiring company, and in fact cut him out of part of his purchase price because they gave him information. That's the long way around of answering the question. How could a small company ensure that they know what their employees are really feeling rather than what they think they're hearing?
Absolutely. We're in the business of customer surveys, and we do. Our very first project was an employee survey we did for a 4-unit drugstore chain. And the fact of the matter is, management often thinks they know what's going on, and employees crave the opportunity to provide candid feedback. And giving them that opportunity is a great thing with a survey. I just co-authored a book with Diana Kander called Curiosity Muscle, and the curiosity muscle is really focused on how you get to insight. So there's a lot of ways to do a survey and to listen to customers, but how do you use that information and take that all the way to insight? And there's a few different themes that go throughout the book, but one of the first themes in the book is really about blind spots, which I think is the question you're getting at. And we really aren't always aware of our own blind spots. We have to be open to feedback. We have to be listening to others. And in fact, probably the most often way that companies go astray is they get too hooked on their own ideas, and they fail to innovate. And the fact of the matter is, not just startups that have to innovate. Every company has to innovate. The worst failures are the companies that are big companies that failed to see the trend and failed to listen to employees and failed to listen to customers, and didn't change and didn't move the business in that direction.
You're absolutely right on that. I just read an article today about how many companies have failed on that Kresge's, which was a chain, and other ones. But I'm going to ask one more question. But how the surveys of themselves are not enough. How do you take the data and then help the employer apply the data?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a lot of ways to do surveys. SurveyMonkey is a great self-service tool if you want to conduct your own survey. Companies hire us because they want to know the right questions to ask. They want help deriving insight from the data, and they want help distributing that information back to their organizations. We're the largest player in the multi-unit restaurant space, so we work with many multi-unit restaurants as well as multi-unit retailers. And the challenge, I think, is deriving insight from that and making sure that people have real-time access to that information so that they can act on it. And that's a little bit about what we do.
Dan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Do you have a website?
Absolutely. Well, the website for SMG is www.smg.com, and the website for the book is curiositymuscle.com.
Okay. It's available at Amazon?
It is pre-release. It's about a few weeks away from being out in the market. Yes.
I remember as a United Airlines commercial, it must have been 4 or 5 years ago, where the president passes out the airline tickets, and he's sending out the senior team to go out and visit customers. And they were asking him at the end of the commercial, what are you going to do? I'm going to go out and talk to a customer that we used to have. So that the idea of as the company grows, you get distance and sometimes even layers between the ultimate customer and the operation of the company. And how do you help managers understand and owners that they need to get back in touch with their roots, their customers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, we often, as we go into an organization, it's not, senior management doesn't have a single voice. Senior management has many voices. There's marketing and operations and the CEO and the president. Lots of investors often have a voice in what's happening with an organization. And the problem is that there's a lot of really smart people in the room. And, the same thing that works for one organization doesn't work for the next organization necessarily. So it's really about understanding what's best for your organization and then acting on that. And the only way to do that is by listening to customers. So, it's the only way that you can really hear what current customers are saying and then prioritize it. We use, advanced research approaches to help companies focus on what's most important, because invariably people complain about everything. So if we're doing a survey for a retailer, I'm sure that someone complained about the parking lot. The key is not that they have to go fix the parking lot. The key is that they have to focus on the right things in that brand that are going to help them drive further success. And getting alignment on that, it's not one person in senior management. It's the whole organization. And the whole organization, rather than have an opinions debate that you don't end up winning, because there's a lot of strong and smart personalities in senior management, often at companies. That's what you want. You want people that can advocate for different approaches. But how do we align them? And the way to align them is on what customers and employees are saying.
There's on a recent show we had a guest, and Don raised the experience that he had, that he was going to order something off of this website, and there was no phone number. There was virtually no phone number to talk to the company. So I'm amazed at the number of people in today's business society, especially those that are web-based, who believe they don't need to talk to the customer.
Yeah, or who fail to talk in a meaningful way. I mean, the United example that you used a minute ago, the YouTube video, United Breaks Guitars, is exactly the story, I think, that probably prompted that ad, where they failed to hear a customer, failed to treat them properly, failed to fix something that they broke, and it cost them dearly. it costs them, I don't know, 20 million views on YouTube, right? So you have to listen to customers. And, you know, the challenge is that companies today are under a lot of financial pressure for a lot of reasons, and there's limited resources. We all face limited resources, and you can't do everything for everybody. And so the question becomes, what will you do? How will you focus those resources? And again, more reason for prioritization based on what customers really want. But you know, my own personal experience on customer service, I had a bad chat experience recently, and it was clear that whoever was responding to wasn't a person; it was a computer. And you know, the computer did not fully understand what I'd written in, and responded back inappropriately. And you know, no human could have made that mistake. So in the name of saving money, which, you know, everybody's got to focus their resources, how do they make sure that they provide the right outlets, the right access, and a proper resolution for customers that really need it? And it's a challenge that a lot of companies face. And again, actually, one of our products is helping call centers understand the customer experience. So.
You know, it's amazing what you were talking about, because it seems strange that we have to teach companies the importance of a customer. Don't you find that strange? Don't you find that crazy?
Yeah, you know, it is crazy, and you know, we've been around for 27 years, and when we started, you know, customer experience measurement wasn't really a thing, and so, you know, the very first part of our sales pitch was this idea of service profit chain, and a loyal customer drives revenue growth. And invariably, when you show up in an organization, people nod their heads, and they say, "Yeah, I get it. Of course, you know, you don't have to tell us that." And that's true, and people probably often need a little reminder of why we're doing this, and we're doing this to serve customers, and that we have to listen to them.
The cost to acquire a customer is very, very expensive today. And the next best customer is an additional sale from an existing customer. And I think that many people think in terms of one sale and getting that one transaction, as opposed to trying to build a relationship with their product line that they can sell multiple products to existing customers. I just wonder where things went wrong.
Yeah. You know, I think that's a great question. And I don't know that it's one answer, but I do. What your question kind of reminds me of a case study that Len Schlesinger shared with me a long time back, and it was in the mobile service space. And they talked about you can focus on high-value, mid-value, low-value customers, which is typical 3x3, or you can focus on people that are loyal to you, loyal to the competition, or the people that are switching. And you know, invariably, many of, I think we've seen this with credit cards, we've seen it a little bit with cell plans, they focus on the switchers. And the fact is they're chasing the last dollar, and those 10% of switchers will continuously switch. Probably better to focus on the people that are most loyal to you already, and those who are loyal to the competition, because they've actually already demonstrated that one critical factor that you're looking for, loyalty. So, yeah, I think it's pretty easy to go tell a story in marketing that we spent this money and we got these people to switch and we brought them on. That same analysis doesn't always happen for customer attrition.
Let me ask you another question, then I'll turn it back to Don. You know, the customer acquisition, the loyalty. Do you believe that today that there are people who are brand loyal, meaning, and also that they are company specific loyal, or is it that gone?
Well, it sort of depends on how you define loyalty, right? There's I think about loyalty in a couple of ways: behavioral loyalty and emotional loyalty. And I do believe there are a lot of people out there that are brand loyal, to be very short answer. But it's easier to get, I think, behavioral loyalty than emotional loyalty. And what I mean by that is, I show up at the same breakfast place when I go out for breakfast, right? I do the same things. We're creatures of habit. And so those behaviors happen, and they continuously happen. And what matters is that my experience after this visit or the next visit is good, right? I had a positive experience. But if I show up and things all of a sudden go wrong, that doesn't mean I'm not going to come back the next time. I've been going here for 3 years. I'm going to continue to go. But if it's wrong the next time and the next time and the next, eventually it does wear on me, and something else comes up, and I try something else, and I create new loyalty. I think that the phenomenon that you're talking about is we're probably exposed to more competitors, more from different angles than ever before, and people love to try new things. And so, are you getting 100% of your customer's dollar? Maybe not, but I think that people absolutely behave in loyal ways and are emotionally loyal to brands. We work with Chick-fil-A as an example, and their customer base is extremely loyal to them, and that is emotional loyalty.
Yeah, that's an interesting example you chose, because my perception of Chick-fil-A is that their institutional message about who their company is and what its value system is what attracts people to come there, whereas other companies would be very reluctant to expose their corporate beliefs.
Yeah, I think corporate purpose and mission is important, and that's one way to connect with customers. There are companies that connect through giving back to different charities, or just demographically who you're connecting with. We work with a small grocer in Cleveland called Heinen's Grocery, and they have a slightly more upscale customer, and it's a very differentiated experience. I think that ultimately customers are choosing something more than just based on philosophy and beliefs, but also based on value and service and product. And, if you go back to Chick-fil-A, they have a great product. They have great service experience. So, yes, they connect with values. It's one way that people connect, but there are plenty of people that don't connect on those values and still go there.
Because they like the food. Don, back to you.
Listening to this, and 2 or 3 questions pop into mind, but the first thing, can you, again, your website again and how people can reach you?
The website for the company is smg.com, and the website for the book is curiositymuscle.com. And actually on the Curiosity Muscle website, there's a little fun interaction that people can ask Andy. So if anybody wants to ask a question, can submit it there.
Someone once told me that he wanted employees that were curious, that wanted to know how things worked. But he felt that his best employees were those that wanted to know how things worked. What do you say to that?
I think all employees are, yearning for knowledge. They want to grow as people, and knowing how things work is one expression of that. I think to have meaningful work, to be appreciated for your contribution in your work, to understand how your work contributes to the broader vision, mission of the company. I think that's a one way of saying that employees want to understand more, know more, contribute more. They appreciate transparency. That's been a big push for us based on our own employee survey. That employees want to be able to ask a lot of questions and hold us accountable for continued growth. And that's something that we're absolutely doing.
Well, we had someone on our show recently that talked about how a good salesman asks questions and waits for the answers. What do you say to that?
I think that's absolutely right. So, when I think about the sales process, I think that, a lot of the sales process still for most businesses is relational. And I'm buying not only from a company and not only a product, but from a person. And that person is the representative of that company. I'm judging the company based on that person. So that person's ability to do discovery and understand my needs, and their ability to connect, critical. And so asking questions and waiting for the answer, not presuming. I think the worst sales process, if you have an hour meeting and you're a salesperson, you show up and talk for an hour, guaranteed not to get the business.
I couldn't agree with you more. In your experience, when you do these surveys, what is the traits that in employees that you look for that you find most often lacking?
So a couple of different things. So we as a company, we use a selection tool, employee selection tool, that looks at personality and skill set, and things like integrity and excellence and quality and persuasion and ability to convince something of someone. Those are things that are important to us. We are not really in the business of helping our clients select employees, but we have themes that we bring employee feedback into of what's important to employees when we do an employee survey. So, for example, that we're asking about their sense of teamwork, their understanding of the way that service works in that organization, the importance of a service culture in an organization, we want their opinions on management, and just sort of the recognition that I need in a job, and the tools and resources I need to do a job. A lot of employee success is around job design. Or we have the right employees doing a job that they're capable of doing. And so we help companies understand that feedback from their own employees. And then, the very first thing that we recommend when you're doing an employee survey is to share that feedback with those same people and to talk about it. If you think about an employee survey, it is typically a confidential conversation with employees. So how do I give employees an outlet confidentially to give us feedback? That's great. It's an important piece of that conversation. In my view, that's the first piece of the conversation, because you'd rather be able to have a transparent dialogue with employees about what's working and what's not working that's not anonymous but named. Like, I can look at you and I can understand your needs and I can respond to those needs. And that is a more healthy way, and really a confidential survey is a check on that system that you are communicating with employees. And if you're not, then you get that feedback in a confidential way. You can digest it for a minute, and you sit down and you share it, and you talk about it. You say, I hear that in the survey, you're concerned about the level of communication that we're having as an organization. What can we do to fix that? Again, I'll go back to Curiosity Muscle. Curiosity Muscle is a fictional story about a gym. And it's a chain of gyms that was successful early on and lost its way. And, we've seen that story many, many times. So it's business fiction. And what we really tried to tell in that book is that there's not one opinion that solves this. There's not one person that's the hero that's going to solve it, that understands everything and has the solution. But what they end up doing is talking to employees and getting ideas and listening to employees and engaging in a practice in that story of finding their point of differentiation and path to success. And that's really the key here, is that understanding what's important to your customers and how will you succeed in your market.
Wow. I'm going to ask one more question and turn it over back to Dan. I guess my question is, when I'm a small business, when I come to you for help, what are the 2 or 3 questions you ask the business in order to do your job?
In order to do our job? So, that's a great question. So what are the 2 or 3 questions that we would ask a company that's coming to us in order to do our job. And, we try really hard to learn client businesses. So, if I had a meeting, if one of our salespeople had a meeting with an organization, they should have visited that organization and spent time there. They should have done all their research and looked online and bought something and experienced a product or service. And, having known that, and if they have a survey or feedback mechanism in the marketplace, I would expect our team to have taken their survey. And, in light of that, when a company comes to us and says, tell us about you, I would ask, well, what is it that you're doing today? Presuming I don't know anything, only what I experienced. And what are you happy with? And what are you not happy with? What are you working on? Organizationally, as a company, SMG not only helps companies listen, but we like to think of ourselves as a catalyst for change. How do we get better? How will we innovate? How will we get insight from customer? And really, we are not experts in every client's business. We rely on clients to tell us what they're working on because they are experts in their business, and they can start after the problem. And so, customer attrition is a concern of ours. Or the call center experience. Some of the same things that we've already talked about will often come up, but we're really trying to understand what their concerns are and what brings them to meeting with us. What's their experience in the measurement space? What do they think about surveys? Do they ever take surveys as customers? Certainly a big trend in customer feedback for us is shorter surveys and more easy ways to provide feedback. So it doesn't have to be a survey to get feedback. We can get behavioral data as well based on a customer's own computer system, just to help the client understand the consumer behavior and consumer needs.
When we think about writing books, we think about who is it that we want to write to and what is the message that we want to communicate. So in your book, who are you writing to, and what's the message that you want to communicate to those readers?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I helped my father write a book, 10 Commandments of Business, 25 years ago, and I wasn't sure I wanted to write a book because I thought I don't know how to cover the topic of customer insight fully. And I saw Diana Kander's book, All In Startup, which is really a similar business fiction, but focused on the lessons of startup. And I saw that, and I loved reading it. Actually, my first meeting with Diana, she said, "Have you read my book?" I said, "No." And she said, "Well, if you start it, you'll finish it." I thought, well, for a business book, that's a pretty good challenge. And I read it over the weekend. And so, we're in the business of customer insight. And honestly, I don't feel like I can cover the topic of consumer insight completely. I don't think that I can, in a book, try in a compelling way, rather than writing a textbook, write something that people really want to read and understand some of the key messages. And so I saw this opportunity as business fiction to reach a much broader audience of managers and CEOs and anybody that's interested in delivering a better experience for customers and driving revenue, to understand some of the key principles of listening to customers. And, those principles are things like, watch out for your own blind spots, focus on the right things. And that idea that we could tell a simple story and get a message out, that was what compelled me to write that book.
We've been talking with Andy Fromm. He's CEO of SMG, along with New York Times bestseller Diane Kander. The name of his book is The Curiosity Muscle, a story of how 4 simple questions uncover powerful insights and exponential growth. Andy, we're going to post a link to your website tonight on recalculating.biz, where you can hear this program and every other past and future program. And you can also tell us via survey what guests you'd like Andy, you'd like to hear. Andy, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Dan Perkins here from Recalculating.biz. I want to tell you about Bob Bethel. Bob's new book is Strengthen Your Business, Fail-Proof Strategies for Small Business. His suggestions are easy to understand and very helpful. Bob Bethel's book, Strengthen Your Business, can be found at Amazon.com or can be ordered at your local bookstore. Dan Perkins with your featured book.
Want to know more about health savings accounts for your company or yourself? Go to 2hsa.com and get a free employer's primer. Health savings accounts are a cost-effective way of offering health care benefits to your employees and yourself. HSAs build retirement funds for your employees, improve morale, and reduce your health care benefit cost. For a free employer guide to HSAs, go to 2hsa.com. That's 2hsa.com.
Dan, one thing I learned in corporate America was that no one wanted to take risks. That's why large corporations buy startups. Someone took a risk. Dusty Staub has written a book, and I love the title, A Call for Corporate Courage. Leadership expert shares how to take calculated risk in your career. I love the title, Dusty. I love the thought, and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm going to ask a couple of questions and then turn it over to Dan, but my first question is, Dusty, what's your background and why did you come to write the book?
I started off running crisis centers, kind of life and death issues when I was a young man, then worked in mental health, and then I migrated to being a licensed marital and family therapist in private practice, and then I went to work for a behavioral sciences consulting firm, which seemed to make a big difference. I got to work with CEOs and organizations and help leaders become more effective. And about 1990, I started my company, Staub Leadership International, where we really work on liberating the purpose, passion, and power of individuals, teams, and organizations.
Well, that's interesting. But with that background, all right, but you decided to write a book. And what are the 2 or 3 main points of your book?
Well, one of the main points is that where your leadership stops, where your courage stops is where your leadership stops. And that one of the biggest issues in corporate America, and political America for that matter, is that there's a big failure of nerve. And people are lacking one or more of the key acts of courage. And my breakthrough was taking courage and breaking it down into specific actions so people could understand where they were strong, where they were weak, and have a way of being able to actually build their courage quotient.
I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to turn it over to Dan because Dan's really a good inquisitor on this area.
Thank you. Welcome to the program, Dusty.
Thanks, Dan.
So, corporate courage. Give me, if you can, give me an example of a corporation that, from your perspective, lacks corporate courage.
Well, I can give you a lot of examples. Let's go with Kodak. Kodak actually came up with the digital imaging. They had all the patents on it, but they didn't have the courage to go with that. They kept writing the film down. Kodak is a mere shadow of what it once was. It made its most money by selling off billions of dollars worth of patents just recently. Motorola lacked the courage to leverage and move into new things. Nokia, same thing. What happens to an organization is they get comfortable doing what they do well. I think I heard you say that what happens is that big organizations buy small entrepreneurial organizations because they're doing something the big organizations have lacked the nerve to do or have been unable to do. So you can go through example after example of what happens when courage is missing. We can go through integrity examples like Enron, etc.
So if we look at those 2 kinds of examples, is the lack of courage, and let's look at we can talk about your Kodak example for one. You could look at Xerox, you could look at Motorola, the things you talked about. You talked about being comfortable.
Yes. Status quo.
Pardon me?
People fall in love with the status quo.
Right. That, hey, it ain't broke, why should we fix it?
Exactly.
And that attitude creates a situation where they don't see either evolution of new technologies or competitors nipping at their heels that all of a sudden have overtaken them. But in addition to the management of the company, since the three companies we just put on the table were all public companies, and those companies have boards of directors, where's the responsibility of the board of directors?
Boards of directors very often tend to be rubber stamps for what a strong CEO wants. And having a strong board of directors, which brings some strategic guidance, is very helpful. The problem is many of the boards of directors are composed of senior leaders from other big organizations, and they have the same blinders on. And, I will tell you this, from now 35 years of consulting experience, I've not met one CEO who failed because they weren't smart enough. Every failure, every CEO has been fired that I've read about and studied about was fired because of a failure of nerve. They either lacked the courage to confront and deal with an issue that the organization had to address, or a colleague who'd been with them for a while, or they lacked the courage to be confronted, to hear the bad news, and they got blindsided. And as we both know, when you get blindsided in an organization for which you're responsible, it's almost never good.
But do we have I'm a registered investment advisor and been managing money for 45 years. Don't we have a different business model today in the sense that there is greater activity on the part of shareholders in trying to shape or change or mold or move the direction of the company than ever before?
Yes, I agree, and I think that's actually a good thing. I think it's still in its infancy, though.
So, what kind of services besides your book do you provide? Other services for corporate leaders who begun to realize that their past is catching up with them and they need to change?
Yeah, let me give you a term I've coined. I call it the effective intelligence of an organization. One of the things we do is we work with teams and departments and senior leaders to help multiply the effective intelligence of their organization. What we find is that there's more intelligence, more capability, more ingenuity, more engagement available in the human system of most organizations than they tap. A good organization maybe gets 30, 40% of what is capable of the people and the systems within it, and that's a good organization. And multiplying that intelligence, there are tools. There's power questions, there's active listening, there's strategic perspective, there's identifying critical human systems factors, there's identifying the essential behaviors, the 5 or 6 core supervisory practices we want across our organization that's going to really engage people and bring out the best. And building a sense of psychological safety, absolutely essential for all those things.
One of the things that I would like to spend a moment talking about is that in many cases, in many corporations, success becomes your enemy. And I never forget the many of the illustrations that were used about some of the technology companies. For one of the oldest, IBM. IBM had tremendous growth, but it kind of stopped. And the reality of one of the reasons why it stopped is that it was still doing business, still generating revenue, but its ability to grow its business was a function of how big the business had already grown. You can grow a $5 billion business, but if you're a $50 or $100 billion or $250 billion business in a particular business segment, you're the dominant leader and you control significant market share. It's hard to grow your business anymore.
Yes. Yeah. Doing what you've always done, absolutely. I'm looking at Google now, looking at our alphabet. The interesting thing will be, Google seems to have a lot of courage, and they seem to be doing a lot of things right. But will they continue to push the edges? And they have a very radical philosophy about how they go about looking at businesses and creating new businesses. But good, you used IBM. So let's go back and look at IBM for a second. John Akers was the CEO of IBM. He participated, he'd grown up in it. He was a very driven, very smart guy. And yet his board fired him because IBM's share price dropped down to like $44, $45 a share from 160 or 170. And they went out and hired a marketing guy, Lou Gerstner, from RJR Nabisco. And Gerstner came in and he said, all right, we got to remember what our core reason is, why people want to buy Big Blue. And he got them going back to some of their core, but he also then focused on the services division. It's been the services division that has helped IBM grow. So businesses have to be willing to try new things, venture into new ways, building and leveraging off their base. But that takes courage. And Dan, where they lack that, that's where they start going down the chute.
So if we look at, let's talk about another segment, and then I'll give it back to Don in a minute or so. But let's look at a segment that's just going into absolute collapse, regardless of who you are. Almost. That's the American retail sector, especially the retail sector in bricks and mortar. I mean, the number of retail outlets, I saw a number recently that they believe by the end of this year, there will be between 8,000 and 10,000 retail stores, primarily related with chains, that will close in America. And the problem is that the spillover effect, as these big chains close stores, little chains go out of business, and mall operators are finding higher and higher vacancies, many of the mall operators are in trouble. So there's a spillover effect of one to the other. Is that retail industry, as we've known it in the past, bricks and mortar, not only dying, but is it dead?
Oh, that's a great question. There is a huge bloodbath in retail, and what it is the online onslaught that people could have seen coming maybe 10 years ago, but brick and mortar retailers tended to avoid or not deal with. But it's not necessarily the end. Look at Apple stores; they're thriving. So there are certain stores, certain retail segments that can thrive, but it's going to have to be a different kind of intelligence. It's going to be blending with your online offerings with the brick and mortar. And I know more and more young millennials, and in my own family, we like going to certain stores. We like going out, but we're very picky about which stores we go to. So I don't think that they're dinosaurs, but they do need to reinvent themselves, and there's going to be a reckoning that's going to be very costly.
I look at the quarterly reports on Sears and the Sears Holding Company. They're closing more and more stores, and their Kmart operation is closing stores. A lot of these retailers are either closing or going. Toys R Us is selling now. Toys R Us is closing all of their stores. Kids R Us and their logo are all up for sale. And the word I hear is that there's a very keen interest in owning the names Toys R Us, Kids R Us, and Joffrey, the giraffe. But they're closing all of their stores. They get out of the business totally. I mean, that's a place where we used to shop, but all the people that spun off to try and build similar stores to Toys R Us are all gone. I mean, that space is gone, and I don't know how you bring it back. I really don't. We just had an interview with a young woman who started a spice company, and she started from the very beginning on the internet, and she's talking about her next move is her presence on Amazon, but they're giving some consideration of opening a singular bricks and mortar store. And we've had a number of guests on the show who built a very successful business on the internet who are contemplating, but clearly you get a sense of concern about going in to the overhead expense and the cost of operating a bricks and mortar store, about whether they really should be in that, or should they be concentrating more of their efforts in expanding their presence.
Well, I'm gonna jump in here, Dan, because the Supreme Court has just put an interesting nail into the internet by saying that states and localities can impose a sales tax on internet sales. And it's taken them 2 days I just saw something come across the desk, and I'll ask Dusty. Now, if you're a person of courage or a manager of courage, do you see that as a way of bringing back your store into the mainstream?
Well, it depends on the store. It depends on location, and it depends on what you're offering and how you exhibit, how you put it out there. I would say that the Supreme Court ruling is going to cost online companies more. It's going to take away that tax-free advantage that people had shopping online. And so it makes it just a little bit less attractive. There's still the convenience factor. But I'm going to go back to what I said a little bit ago. More and more people are wanting to have a chance to walk into a brick-and-mortar store, to actually touch something, to try it on, to see it, to taste it, to feel it. But it has to be the right mix. It has to be the right offering, and you have to be in the right location to do that. So I think a big part of this is being very courageous and looking out there very boldly and saying, okay, what's the reality? What's the best we can predict about what's likely to happen? And how do I want to define myself? For instance, when Apple decided to put out brick-and-mortar stores, I didn't think that was going to work, but it's worked beautifully for them, and it's helped them with their share price and their sales. But they did it very smart, and they did it right. And so again, you have that online presence. If you need an online presence, and you then have a smart brick-and-mortar store that amplifies that they actually synergize together, then strategically, yes, you can move forward. But I would say a lot of courage, asking a lot of good advice, getting a lot of input, and thinking about it hard before you commit.
Don,
go ahead. Go ahead, Dan.
I got a piece of news this morning that goes along with what you just reported. I was at a conference this morning with a bunch of CPAs, and this is their take of the Supreme Court, and I'd be interested to hear what Dusty has to say. They actually believe that Supreme Court ruling will destroy small internet businesses, and this is why they said it. Once you start promoting your product on the internet and you have to start collecting taxes, you have to be able to provide tax return information for potentially over 40,000 tax jurisdictions in the United States. There is no internet business that can perform the reporting requirements to all the tax jurisdictions. If you sell in where I live in Lee County, you're going to have That's because they don't listen to our program. If you remember, 2 years ago, we had a man on the show who sold his company for $100 million to Microsoft. And what does he do? He provides to small businesses tax information on every of the 40,000 taxing locations, and automatically takes the records, takes each sale and puts it into a reporting file so that they can do it. He was on our program, one of our first guests, if you remember, Dan. And and when I said $100 million. I'm sorry, he sold it for only $52 million. But people say, well, why do you need that? Well, I guess he was more prescient than a lot of other people. But Dusty, we're talking over you, and you're the guest. But I was going to go a different direction and ask you a different question about courage. And it came up in the USA Today. They called me on this. You're an executive at an airline, and the airlines have been cramming more and more seats into
smaller and smaller airplanes. You have to make a decision between improving your passengers' experience or improving the bottom line. What do you recommend under your principles an individual should be doing, a manager should be doing?
Well, you have to look at both. And one of the things that I say to people, wherever they are in an organization, you've got to remember who actually pays you. It's not your corporation. It's that end customer who's buying your product or service. And in that sense, we're all in service. And if we alienate those customers, if they don't feel like that the value they're getting for what they're paying, the value equation for them doesn't mix, they'll find another way to go. And so I think that what a CEO or senior leader for an airline has to do is think about what's the experience of my customer, my client, what's the bottom line, and how do I reconcile this? Now you could really drive up your bottom line short term. This is what IBM did, by the way, with under Johnny Akers. They incentivized their salespeople to go out and sell more, but to spend less time with key customers, and they crashed and burned like 2 years later. So if I really just up my bottom line, this is one of the dangers of looking at things quarter to quarter, by the way, is that if I have analysts looking at things quarter to quarter and I have to improve every quarter, I'm going to sacrifice the long-term health of my organization and probably put it at huge risk. And so some of it is the courage of saying to analysts and saying to people on my board and my investors, look, here's what we're going to do. Here's the plan. Here's how it's going to work. And we're going to have a few times where we're not going to be as high as we could be, or we're going to even be down. But it's part of our strategy. And here's why it works. It's worked for Amazon. You know, it's working for Tesla. So it could work if you have the courage and you have the guts and the heart to make the tough call, saying we've got to keep the customers as happy as we can, and we've got to watch that bottom line. So it's a both and for me. It's a matter of managing that equation. And if it was easy to do, anybody could do it.
Yes, but Dusty, it's been my experience. That's maybe one of the reasons why I've been an entrepreneur most of the latter half of my life. But inside corporations, they're ruled by fear. If you make the wrong decision, somehow or other you're going to be hurt by it. And, and once you pass a certain level, it seems that you move upward and onward from failure to failure. It's almost like it's a two-way. Failure below a certain level, you're knocked out. Failure above a certain level, that means you get another job. I mean, that to me, and all my, I've been covering corporations for years, and I've seen this in so many places. I just, you can comment on it and tell me I'm all wet, but what do you think?
No, I totally agree with you, and that's the thesis. What I'm putting out there is that it's the fear runs us, fear of failure, fear of being seen as weak, fear of falling on my face. Mary Kay Ash created Mary Kay Cosmetics when everybody said nobody can build a business on the backs of stay-at-home moms. Well, she proved them wrong. Soichiro Honda built a Honda Motor Company, and both of them had a philosophy which was called fail forward. How can we teach employees to fail forward? And they didn't punish people for failure or mistakes. They rewarded them if they were the right kinds of mistakes. We didn't repeat the same mistake. We did our due diligence. We did our homework. It was for the greater good. You checked in with sources that could have helped prevent which could have guaranteed greater success, and you did do that. So if you hit those criteria, then you help fail the organization forward. So Soichiro Honda said, look, the only way forward is to fail quickly, learn from it, and move on to the next failure. And so for me, one of the things is what happens with most of corporate America, especially as they get to a certain level, and this was documented by Dr. Chris Argyris at Yale University. He said the most successful people later in their career become the least successful people because they get blinded or hypnotized by their past success. They stop learning. They become more and more careful, cautious, anxious about making a mistake and slipping down the ladder, and therefore they make the biggest career mistake, the biggest mistakes for their businesses they could.
I think you're so right, but with the remaining time, let's turn it around. Small business people are, by and large, they jump off the cliff and help somebody build a swimming pool before they land when they start out. But at some point, they become very conservative and almost rigid. Have you seen that?
I have. A third of our business is with small family-run businesses. A third is with big corporations, and the third is in the healthcare field. And what I would say is I see people start off with the courage to dream, and they have the courage to take action. And even within entrepreneurs, though, Don, what I see is that people lack there's 7 acts of courage, just very quickly. The courage to dream, the courage to take action, the courage to confront, the courage to be confronted, the courage to learn and grow, the courage to be vulnerable and open, and the courage to take action. And one of the things I see is that in every entrepreneur, they're not strong in all 7. So let's say they don't have the courage to be confronted. Therefore, bad news comes up. People have a different point of view that's important to listen to. They don't, and so that's where they stumble. Or they lack the courage to confront and hold someone accountable who's been with them for a while, but the company's outgrown that person, and so that becomes their stumbling block. Or they lack the courage to be vulnerable and ask for help. Those are the 3 big ones I see in most corporations, either a lack of the courage to confront, or the lack of the courage to be confronted, or the lack of the courage to be vulnerable. And the 4th one, is another big one, is the lack of the courage to learn and grow, which means to step into ambiguity, into the unknown, to take a calculated risk, and or to give up the need to be right. And so when I'm working with an entrepreneur or a CEO in a Fortune 500 company or somebody in healthcare, it's all around which of these acts are you strongest in, which one have you least developed, because the one you've least developed is the one that's going to trip you up later in your career. And by the way, if you don't address it, it's going to suck down one of the other acts of courage that is a strength for you right now. So it's a matter of seeing it, addressing it, and dealing with it before it can bite you on the rear end.
I'm going to turn it over to Dan, but your website where people can find the book and more about you?
Yes, the website is staubleadership.com, and Staub's just S-T-A-U-B. And Rusty Staub's a third cousin of mine, so if you remember the spelling of his last name, staubleadership.com. And the name of the book is really The 7 Acts of Courage, Bold Leadership for a Wholehearted Life.
Dusty, I have one question to ask you, then unfortunately, we have to move on. I'm doing a consulting piece right now with a startup company. And they have amazing technology, world-changing technology. And one of the things that we're talking about is an exit strategy. And I'm pounding on the table. The exit strategy is no exit. Because once you become a public company, the challenges that you have with reporting to the various research groups and brokerage firms and everything else, you begin to lose control of your company. And I've seen companies that were private, went public, and turned around when went private again. Yeah. Going public is not the panacea that a lot of people think that it is. And what do you talk to people about privatizing or never going public?
That's a great question, Dan, and I know we don't have a lot of time, so what I would say is you've got to decide what matters most to you. Is it being able to really nurture your child, see its full growth, and then pass it on, or is it to cash out, sell, and then see what someone else does with it in the publicly traded sphere? I advise people to keep their organizations private, where they have control, where they can manage the quality, where they can continue to invest and grow it, and make sure they have a good succession plan in place. Or if they're going to sell it, think about the idea of how you sell it and how you package it. As you know from your consulting, you can package things in lots of different ways.
Yes.
For instance, one of my clients put together more than 200 orthopedic surgeons, created a group, and they sold 40% of the group for millions of dollars to a venture capital firm, but they maintained 60%. They got their cash out, and yet they're still in control. So there are ways to do this,
yes.
And you have to be really smart. And you need a really smart advisor, Dan, probably like you and Don.
So, Dusty, thank you so much for joining us today. Back to you, Don.
We've been talking to Dusty Staub. A link to his website will be on recalculating.biz tonight, where you can hear this and every other program, and you can take a short survey where you can tell us what you'd like to hear on this program. Dusty, thank you so much for being with us. It was really illuminating.
Thank you for joining us on Recalculating, a program designed to help you be successful.